Hello, Casey. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tiago. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we were just talking off record about a surgery that you had where you kind of lost your voice, at least for a while until you're recovering it. For a podcaster, like our voice is our main asset, right? So can you tell me a little bit about how was the whole process, how that affected you and your show?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. It was definitely something I wasn't expecting. I had thyroid cancer at the top of last year. So, actually, about a year ago this month. And when I went in, the surgeon said that 99% of the patients come back with their full voice. So, I
Okay.
really didn't think I would have any downtime whatsoever. So, that was an interesting and unexpected result of the surgery. And like you said, it definitely shook my identity because I've been podcasting since 2018. I also love to sing. So my singing
Mm.
voice was also affected.
Whoa.
I didn't realize how connected I was to that as an outlet for my own personal enjoyment. So it took a little bit to re-anchor into who am I now? How am I going to promote my business? How I'm going to share my message? So that was definitely an interesting journey.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, before I even started the show years ago, that was also a pivot point where I was pushing myself out of my comfort zone to stay in alignment with one of my core values, which is integrity. And at the
Mm.
time in 2018, I was focused on business consulting and helping other really brilliant female leaders be authentic, use their voice, build those know, like, and trust factors, and market themselves.
Mm.
And so I didn't have that platform myself. So that's really how I started getting into podcasting, because it was very important that I did what I was teaching and that I
Mm.
modeled the way, even though I was much more
Totally.
comfortable behind the scenes. It was
Yeah.
just way, way easier being able to polish something before I
Mm.
presented it. So, yeah, it really kind of came full circle where pushing myself out of the comfort zone in 2018 and beginning the show all the way to having that surgery and being like, oh, now I actually have this challenge where I can't really
Right.
successfully go through an interview or an
Mm.
episode.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been really hard, especially because you're not expecting, right? So
Yeah.
you are expecting to, finish the surgery, maybe have like a week of recovering time, and then just go back to your normal podcasting and everything, right?
Yes.
So that didn't happen. Fortunately, now you recovered,
Yes.
which is great.
Thank you.
Tell me about this process. What does a person that is a podcaster, that has a podcast, that has a show, that didn't prepare to actually lose that show for a few months? Uh, yeah, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think that, in times, especially when they're unexpected, when they come up, like, I feel like one of the first things we do is shame and blame ourselves. So I definitely went
Mm.
there first. Like, why didn't I have more episodes in the hopper? Why didn't I foresee that could happen and have a month or two ready to
Right.
go?
Mm.
Um, and I think that one of the lessons that I personally learned, which is again something that I help my clients with, is how do we show ourselves grace? And how
Mm.
do we, really turn all of the compassion that we have so freely with other people back to ourselves, which is often difficult to do. So I
Mhm.
really had to take my own medicine. And I had
Right.
to look within and be like, okay, like, how do I accept the situation? How do I accept
Mhm.
myself? How do I release judgment and criticism of myself with all of the shoulds, my own
Right.
expectations, and then my audience expectations? The
Mhm.
cool thing about podcasting is they live on. And so I was able to promote past shows and still connect in a way where I may not be able to have fresh live content, but you have, 300 episodes you can dive into to still get actionable tips and hear my
Right.
voice and kind of go from there. So I think
Mm.
that really helped. It wasn't something that was poof, be gone, that's the cool thing with podcasts. It's not a one and done, but it's in your bank of resources that you could
Totally.
share
Yeah.
for years.
Yeah, and it's a great exercise to repurpose the content you have, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in that way, it's a great challenge. It's a way to force you to learn new skills. Before we go on, I'm
Absolutely.
interested in knowing more about your podcast. So if you could just give us the pitch, what is your podcast about and what is its name?
Absolutely. So the podcast is Heart Glow CEO, and we really focus on topics that are going to help the high achieving female leader, CEO, executive go from a people pleasing perfectionist to a profitable powerhouse.
Hmm. Amazing.
Yeah.
And why did you start it? So, I mean, we already talked a little bit about it, but I'm interested in knowing about your first episode. So, do you remember the first episode? Were you nervous? You're just telling us that you were more used to be behind the scenes. Yeah, tell us about those times.
Yeah. I was absolutely nervous. I really was like, man, I don't even know anything about this world. And I remember listening to myself back, mortified by the number of times I said, and like. I mean, I just couldn't even believe it. I was like, do I talk like that? So again, it was a lesson in acceptance. One of the things that I knew was a part of my personality is I'm a natural cheerleader. So I have a way of being able to see your strengths and highlight those. So I
Hmm.
decided to start with interviews instead of solo casts. And that was really a way that I could dip my toe in and still have some comfort and really highlight my guests. And that really was a big part, if not all of it, for a couple of years until the next step of evolution was there, where it was like, okay, this is awesome. I
Hmm.
had dozens and dozens of guests, highlighted them, promoted their business, got to meet amazing people from around the world. And then there was a point where it was like, okay, actually, I have a voice, I have an opinion. I also want to start now pushing myself to solo casts. And so you'll kind of see if you look through the evolution of the podcast, you'll start to see solo casts.
Hmm.
And then interviews were still there because people love to hear multiple voices. And my show was unedited. And so it was a very real, raw exploration of what it took to be an entrepreneur and all the shadow sides of all the things that come up naturally, like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, inner
Yeah.
critic.
Hmm.
And so we were able to kind of like have this very intimate, unedited show with guests, and people really felt like they were a part of this intimate
Hmm.
conversation. So that
Right.
really grew the show.
Hmm. Yeah, I like this idea of your natural cheerleader, and you could use that in your behalf in your own podcast. I'm
Yeah.
curious about what techniques, like specific techniques, do you apply when having an interview so that you get your guest to shine and to kind of put the focus on them. So do you have any specific questions, specific techniques, the way you prepare the interview so that someone can just listen to this and basically reproduce your type of interviews?
Absolutely. I will say in the beginning, I definitely stuck to like the same 5 questions. It was definitely more scripted. And as I grew and my confidence grew, I realized that the juicier episodes were when I didn't use any pre made questions, whether they came from me or the
Mhm.
guest. So many guests have a speaker sheet with, here are my topics. Here are the things that I want you to ask me. I throw those out the window. So I find the best organic conversations are one when I know my guest. So I do my research, I get prepared. I check out all of their socials and their website, and I get to know kind of their essence and their feel. And then because most of my audience is very similar to me, I think to myself, what am I most curious about? What's going
Mhm.
to be an actionable tip that's going to help me thrive either personally or professionally? And then I develop my own unique questions from there. And it becomes a much more real, non rehearsed conversation versus
Mhm.
something that's robotic that potentially the guest has said on many, many other shows. And it just becomes very rote. So I would say
Yeah.
that that was something that I learned with the interviewing process.
Hmm. So kind of finding your voice. And it's funny because even with this podcast, the lessons from a podcaster, I started with a script, right? Like the questions I also sent you.
Yeah.
And at first, I was like, just following each question, and they were good questions. I think they were bringing a lot of value for the listeners, but it was just not me. It was very
Mhm.
robot. It was too robotic for my taste. So now I try to just follow, my curiosity. And I think what you just said, it's totally true. Your audience, normally you attract people that think alike, that are similar. Even like, I guess for you, you attract more female listeners. I normally attract actually more male listeners in other
Yeah.
podcasts I host. So you, and of course diversity is really important, but you always attract people that have certain similarities or curiosities or perks that are similar to the host. So just follow your curiosity, and others will like it too. So I think, yeah, that's a
Absolutely.
great advice. I'm curious about, um do you have any interesting story or like any guest that kind of changed your perspective, or like some particular interview that was really hard for you to do, uh,
Mm.
that I don't know, comes to mind, either because they spoke too much or they spoke too little, and how did you manage such a guest?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. That's a really good question. I would have to say, like, again, part of it is learning how to navigate and having the emotional intelligence of being able to kind of politely um, curtail a real talky guest and kind of bring them back, or a guest that's
Mm.
heavy in promotion, because one of my big keys is servant leadership. So the whole thing is like, what is going to be the most value for the listener, whether it's a solo cast or an interview? And so continually pulling it back to the focus of what's going to keep them listening. And that's one of the reasons now that I've shortened my episode length. I used to have longer episodes, but I do feel like in general, the attention span has gotten a little bit shorter from my perspective, what I see. And one of the feedback tips that I get from listeners is like, I can get so much in 15 minutes. I have
Mm.
15 minutes on the treadmill or in my commute. And so that's again like continually listening to the feedback and adjusting accordingly. I would say, specifically to answer your question, one episode that comes to mind that was really blown away is Pauline Young. And she does very similar things to me. But at the time when I interviewed her, I was blown away by her confidence level. Just
Mm.
so clear and so confident. And, there's a level of magnetism when somebody is completely in their power and they're speaking from wisdom. And that was a really fun episode to follow and also to keep up with, to keep
Mm.
up this really engaging dialogue so it didn't
Right.
feel lopsided.
Mm. So you need to somehow match the energy of your guest,
Yeah.
so that you so that it's not too unbalanced. Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. To match it, but then also to remember that it's your show and the
Mm.
facilitation responsibility is still yours. And so making
Right.
sure that you don't have a runaway train and that it always comes back to your intention of your show.
Mm.
So I think that that's a real key thing, because oftentimes, again, with really experienced guests, they can take over because they're in it, they're passionate, they want to share their business. And so I think that that's kind of the teeter totter. How do I balance, but also lead my own show?
Yeah, because you're just saying, having a podcast of 15 minutes is very short, right? And
Yeah.
if you have someone that speaks a little bit more than what you, not that it's needed, but speaks more, and obviously you won't fit on 15 minutes. How do you kind of cut that conversation short and bring the next question? Do you have any techniques for that, or do you just edit afterwards? No, you just told me that it's unedited. So yeah, how do you manage that?
Yeah, being prepared, being laser focused on your questions, I think is a big
Mm.
part of it. And then also not being attached to what you thought the episode was going to go. So following the flow and direction,
Yeah,
because
that's a
a
good
lot of
one.
times something surprising comes up and you're like, ooh, that's extra juicy. I'm going to
Yeah.
let go of this thought that I was intending on going, and just I really feel my listeners are going to want to drill down into this.
Mm.
So again, it's like, it's that whole synergy of being prepared and also being non-attached so you can follow the flow of the energy.
I love that. Yeah, being able to let go, it's absolutely necessary. We have a script, but if you don't touch those questions, it's fine. One other tip that I find that kind of works is to say in advance the length of the episode. So before starting the interview, I say, "Hey, this episode is around 15 to 20 minutes,"
Yeah.
and that already helps because the guest already has his mindset. Okay, I want to talk about a bunch of topics, so I cannot take too much in each answer. So that's another tip that I think it works really well.
Yeah,
So
communication is key. I
mhm,
love that tip, Tiago.
yeah, I'm going back to the repurpose, right? Obviously, Podsqueeze is a tool that helps repurposing content.
Yeah.
You had the opportunity as well to, or you were kind of forced to focus more in repurposing your content. What are your techniques? Like, what social media do you use? Do you use shorts? Do you use posts? Tell us how you repurpose your content.
Yeah, absolutely. During the pause last year, I really focused on reels where I was able to just extract the real key nuggets in a very short period of time with the cute
Mm,
emojis to keep people interested. So that was something that I was surprised that it could be easy, but also bite-sized nuggets. And I got a good feedback. People like that. They're like, "Ooh, that's great. I've got 30 seconds. I've got 2 minutes." So that worked
mm,
well. In general, with an episode, I put it on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and I try to change it up based on the platform personality. So my executives on LinkedIn, it's a little bit more professional. The hashtags are a little bit different. I may bring in more of an inspirational quote as the main graphic versus Facebook, which is a little bit more personal, or I don't necessarily target it specifically for a leader because I have a lot of moms that listen where they're like, "I'm not a leader or an entrepreneur, but I get a lot
mhm,
out of this show." And I think that one misconception people have is they potentially could think of a leader as someone behind a desk with a team. But for me, anytime you're influencing anyone, and it could be your family,
mm,
your friend circle, or your team, you're leading. You're leading, and
mm.
people are watching. So I do adjust it based on the personality. I have a little bit more of a graphic lean when it's on Instagram and less of a
Okay.
caption. So it really just depends. But yeah, anytime I can use a tool like yours
Mm,
to optimize the whole flow, I'm all about efficiency.
mm. I'm curious on how you use Podsqueeze on your flow.
Yeah, I use it for the transcript. I have a lot of people that like to read the show in
Oh, okay.
addition or instead of listening. Some of my older demographic sends in comments. I'm so glad that I can actually read. I can start my
Oh,
morning off by reading your show notes. So I use it for that. Absolutely for social media inspiration. Just even sometimes the wording is like, "Oh, actually, that sounds better than what I was thinking." So that's really helpful as well. And one of the things that I haven't really done a lot with, but I'm excited to try are the video clips. So I
mm-hmm,
definitely want to start to
mm-hmm.
incorporate that because I'm very visual and I think people learn a lot better when there's like that visual component in general.
Yeah, yeah. The clips work really well. Even if you don't have a video, we generate audiograms, and
Yeah.
just by having this image of like your picture or something like that, or the picture of your show or a picture of your guest, and then the voice behind it works really well to attract people to your show. I'm curious about the transcript. What do you like? Do you share it on your own website? Where do you make it available?
Yep, I put it on the website. Every episode has the transcript available at the bottom. So it's just super
Hmm.
convenient and it helps with
Yeah.
SEO.
Yes, that's really interesting that people actually like to read. As
Yeah.
a podcast listener myself, I always prefer listening. So I'm like, no, I don't want the transcript, but it's just people are different. Some people prefer reading, and it's great to give them that opportunity so that they can still consume your content. So yeah, that makes a
Absolutely.
lot of
And
sense. Mhm.
what I found, Tiago, is it's age demographic related. My younger listeners absolutely want the shorter version. They want clips, reels,
Mm.
shorts. My older demographic over 65, they love
Mm.
like a white paper feel.
Mm. What is the typical listener of your show, by the way? Do you see a huge range in terms of age and
Typically
demographics,
45 to
or
65 is my range. Women
Mm,
45 to 65.
okay,
Yeah.
cool. So if you're starting now, so as kind of a last question,
Sure.
if you're starting now your podcasting journey, and you could give one advice to yourself, what would that advice be?
Know yourself first. Know your audience. I would say stay really clear with your intention, and also instead of popcorning and following trends, be really clear on what your value is, whether that's staying in 3 to 5 content pillars and really expanding and augmenting and finding new ways to say it so that people know what you stand for. They know how you help them. It's a very clear value add, and it's also a way to boomerang it back to have them become a client, not just a listener. And then the other key piece is consistency, because consistency, again, builds those know, like, and trust factors. And so it then has this connection, this community, and continuing the conversation. So I know that's more than one tip, but if I was just starting out, I would want somebody to give me the down and dirty bullet list.
Yes. So basically, knowing yourself and being consistent is a way to also increase credibility.
Absolutely.
Which eventually also bring more leads, more trust, and also grow your audience. That's great advice, Casey. Yeah. Just tell us, where can we find you? Can you tell us again the name of your podcast, your socials, everything, so that people can stop listening to this and go listen to your show?
Thank you so much, Tiago. It's been such a pleasure. Everything is under Heart Glow CEO.
Perfect. I will link in the description of this episode so that people can just go there and click. Thank you so much, Casey. It was a pleasure to have you in the Lessons from a Podcaster.
Thank you so much.
This podcast is brought to you by Podsqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.